You may know or have heard that this book consists entirely of hotel reviews. Not normally the matter of a novel, perhaps, but this hotel reviewer is kind of singular in his inability to talk about the hotels under scrutiny and instead to go on at great length about certain personal things that would perhaps better have been kept to himself. Thus the story. So I'm going to read a little example here from the book. This passage is called Viking Motel, 1236 North Detroit Avenue, Eugene, Oregon, August 15th to 19th, 2011. My cousin Dennis asked me if I would consider officiating at his nuptial event, and I agreed and therefore needed to find a way to get myself ordained fast. Now it occurred to me that officiating at weddings was a sideline, a moonlighting gig not at all dissimilar to my primary business line of motivational speaking. What kind of wedding-related oratory, after all, is not motivational at its core? Just about anything that comes out of your mouth in the nuptial theater inspires, transports. It seemed just and right that I should apply to the Infinite Love Church, which is one of those seminaries that ask of you only the $18 that will thereafter enable you to carry out the sacred rites associated with marriage. The Infinite Love Church requests that you read a few rather sugary pamphlets about their ecumenical views, and then they send you an email confirming that you are, in law, ordained, after which you're advised to contact the county clerk, wherever you're intending to serve, to ascertain that an online ordination is considered valid in that state. In this case, the affianced parties were Dennis and his bride-to-be, Olga, of Ukrainian origin. Olga had been in this country since she was 7 and had no trace of an accent. She favored brightly colored athletic gear, a little on the baggy side, as though she were trying to hide a third breast. She'd read a lot of Dostoevsky. I learned all of this at a meeting I had with Dennis and Olga, which seemed like something that I ought to do before conducting the nuptial ceremony. If you're officiating and you're trying to seem as though you are an intercessor, that the word of God speaks through you, then you had best meet with the parties concerned. Olga and Dennis came by the motel where I was staying while in town, the Viking Motel. About the women loitering in the parking lot, let me just say, that's youth culture. It's a college town. And let me say, too, that Dennis did not deserve the long interval he served in the federal penitentiary for transporting copies of stolen material across state lines. And if anyone was capable of being rehabilitated in the penitentiary, it was Dennis, who met Olga while he was there. It was some kind of epistolary romance permitted and facilitated by Dennis's job in the prison library. Dennis was a trembly, nervous person with an island of hair on the front of his forehead, a saddle horn, if you will, with not much else anywhere around. He was thin and hunched and resembled one of those dogs that you see in public squares in Eastern Europe. Dennis had not found a way to be comfortable in the world. He seemed as though he were habitually preparing himself for something awful, and this was justified because many awful things had happened to him. He said it was because he wore that necklace with the human tooth on it that his father had given him. At the Viking, there was a sign on the front of the vinyl-sided cottage that served as reception, and that sign said, "Back later, see James in housekeeping." I never did see the sign removed. When James in housekeeping finally did turn up, after Olga and Dennis stood out in the parking lot Watching women in detachable skirts march past, he sheepishly admitted that he had blood he needed to clean up, and the proprietor never appeared at all, which was why Dennis had trouble finding me, neither he nor Olga having sufficient funds for a cell phone, or so they said. After I had drunk several bottles of beer, or more, awaiting their appearance, this behavior is sometimes called a relapse, staring at myself in a mirror on the wall by the bathroom that was so large I began to believe that I could walk into it, there was a knock on the door. Oh, mirror on the wall, who has the beginnings of an irremediable paniculus associated with middle age that no amount of dieting can affect? Who has more body hair than a bonobo? I was wearing only boxer shorts in purple when the knock came. The hip waiters on the cabinet housing the television were for a planned fishing trip in the Cascades area, and I was unwilling to dislodge them to get corduroys out of my drawer. I therefore donned the hip waiters. I could see when I opened the door that Olga was surprised by the outfit, and I begged her to understand that I was an unsurpassed angler and had a suit at the green dry cleaner up the block, as well as a tie with a naked woman on the reverse side. Dennis knew me well enough not to be surprised, however, and soon the two of them were sitting on the bed, somewhat uncomfortably. I poured them pop with some ice fetched from the dispensary out by vending, and then sat in the lone chair by the window, still wearing the hip waders, which were not suspended properly on my shoulders. I asked them, first of all, if their resolve with regard to marriage was earnest and true, and characterized by profundities of desire and mutual support. I told them that marriage, as I had understood it during my own union, come to an end a couple of years before, was a sacred trust, and that many people married because they thought they were supposed to marry, or because society expected it of them, or because one of them was with child, or simply because they were bored and did not know what else to do with their lives. But, I observed, it was possible to do better than this. It was possible to be changed by the revealing light of marriage. In proportion to one's development in marriage, in proportion to the amassing of age-related epiphanic moments in the habit of love that is marriage, it was possible, I said, for the beloved to become more ravishing, more perfect, as when ascending into the concentric rings of paradise, and that in marriage we come to find the flaws of the beloved less irksome, and instead more delightful and endearing, like that weird spitting noise that the beloved sometimes makes when hawking up reserves of toothpaste, or that tendency the beloved has to nervously scratch her ankle over and over again, or how about her wearing 2 pairs of socks all the time? However, as I was saying these things, I happened to look down and to notice that because of the odd layering of my own garments, that is to say, the boxer shorts and the hip waders whose strap had fallen from one shoulder completely, resulting in a sort of bagging of the waders on one side and a concomitant riding up of boxers on the other, one portion of the intimate area of my own person was bulging out the side of my shorts, the sack portion of my most private self. And while some men have modestly sized containers, I was not one of these men. It was not unknown to me previously the occasion of that pouch becoming somehow visible. It was an ongoing problem. And as indeed this was the case now, I quickly looked up. hoping that Olga and Dennis had not glimpsed the bit of me extruded from the shorts via the falling down and bunching of hip waders. Believe me when I say it was one of those wardrobe malfunctions that only chance can bring about. If I could continuously maintain eye contact during the discussion, perhaps I could imperceptibly move the shorts a bit or the waders through some isometric hip exercise so that a bit of fabric would flap over the testicle and its colony of white hairs. I was driven to ever greater heights of rhetorical fancy in order to assure myself that Olga, in particular, continued to make eye contact with me and did not look down. I smiled like a mad person. Any false move or attempt to excuse myself could easily draw her eyes that way. I began looking around the room myself in the hope that my darting eyes, alighting here on the extra-large sex mirror, there on the stain on the stuccoed ceiling, would likewise seduce her gaze. I asked Olga if the marital relations were satisfactory, if she could assure me that these relations were characterized by gentleness and intimacy and proper frequency, and there was a surging of in-breath from Olga, which at first I worried was because she had finally witnessed my little semi-bald protuberance with its 4 white hairs fumbling for recognition. But in fact, I think the in-breath was owing to the question being a probing and challenging one. And she thought for a while, and then she said she believed that the intimate relations were intimate, as she said, as I recall it. Dennis is a very sensitive man who loves the bodies of women, and I am lucky to have a man like Dennis. Then I asked Dennis if the relations were sufficient from his point of view, and he said, in the time I was inside the penitentiary, I came to believe that I might never get to touch the body of a woman again, and so our love is a kind of holy thing. And here the two of them smiled at each other, bashful smiles of the Confederates of love. Thanks.